Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 Residential Insights webinar series. And the big question on everyone's lips, has 2020 and the impact of COVID changed the property landscape for good? My name's Nathan Gallagher. I'm a senior sales manager here at realestate.com.au, and today I'm going to be your host. And I'm lucky enough to be joined by two special guests, Cameron Kusher and Sabina Reid. Cameron Kusher is Executive Manager of Economic Research here at realestate.com.au. And Sabina is a psychologist who covers a range of topics across a range of different groups. She's passionate about the universality of the human experience and believes we all have more in common than we often realise. And today we're going to be touching on a number of key points. We're going to be looking at the consumer behaviour on-site and key property insights post-COVID and 2020. We're going to be looking at how the consumer behaviours has changed over the last year and if those behaviours are here to stay. And finally, what impacts these behaviours have on the property landscape moving forward. Thank you for joining us and tuning in to everyone. And if you have questions throughout the webinar, you can use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen. And I encourage you to drop those questions in, and we're going to have a dedicated section at the end where I'm going to do my very best to cover off some of those questions. Now, to get things underway, I'm going to hand over to Cameron, who's going to be taking you through some of those key behavioural insights on site. Welcome, Cameron.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, everyone, for having me here today. So, as Nathan said, I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into what we're seeing at the moment in the property sector. I know a lot of people here are agents, and generally we'd be pretty happy with what we're seeing at the moment. Although COVID hit last year, and that was the first recession we'd seen in almost 3 decades, there was a lot of government support, there was a lot of support from the Reserve Bank, and there was a lot of support from lenders. And a lot of the support was specifically targeted at the housing sector. And as a result of that, we have seen a big improvement in housing market conditions. We've seen demand rise to record high levels. We've seen a big surge back in transaction activity, and we've seen prices increasing quite rapidly as well, and property selling at a rapid pace. So if we can go to the next slide, what we see in terms of the last 12 months, and this is the 12 months to April, is that prices have grown across each of the states. The other big thing to note in this chart is that the capital city markets have underperformed the regional markets in terms of price growth. And that's true in every single state, probably most stark in Western Australia. Probably the other thing to note is some of the states that have really not seen a lot of price growth over recent years have actually seen some of the strongest increases in property prices over that period of time. Obviously, a big contributor to this has been the Home Builder Grant, but there's been a range of other factors as well. Banks provided a support pipeline for property owners. They allowed people to go on a mortgage holiday, and at one point, 11% of all mortgages nationally were on a holiday, and that's fallen to virtually nothing at the time they stopped reporting and stopped offering those holidays at the end of March. Interest rates have been reduced to their lowest levels on record, and that's encouraged people to move into the housing market, upgrade homes and buy new homes. But the other big factor is that international borders have been shut. And if we look at the data, Australians spend, quite honestly, a fortune travelling overseas each year. And with the international travel now not possible, and for a lot of the last year, even domestic travel has been quite difficult, a lot of people have taken that additional money and put it into the housing market. So from there, if we move forward and have a look at the next slide, as I mentioned, one of the big things that we have seen is a big return in first home buyer numbers. So the Home Builder Grant wasn't a specific grant for first home buyers. It was for anyone that wanted to buy a brand new home. But we have seen for some time, and this continued last year as well, that people were offered, the states offered people grants to build brand new homes as well. And that really drove a big surge in first home buyer numbers. In fact, first home buyer participation in the housing market rose to its highest level since 2009. accounting for about 26% of all mortgages written during most of the second half of 2020. It has started to taper off a little bit over the last couple of months as we've seen the end of home builder. And home builder effectively pulled forward a lot of demand from first home buyers into last year and early this year. And from here, we're probably going to see a little bit less activity from first home buyers. The federal budget did announce some policies that would help them, but they're really unlikely to be as successful as that home builder grant that we saw. The other big factor another big factor in the housing market last year was the fact that borders were shut and we stopped seeing people move into the country. So typically over recent years, we have been seeing about population growth of around 300 to 350,000 a year. A lot of that has actually been driven by people moving to Australia from overseas, as opposed to natural increase. And this year, well, in March of last year, the borders were effectively shut. The government chose not to provide support to some international students as well. So we did see, not an insignificant number of international students move away. And we know that in Australia, a big source of growth of our economy is international students and foreign tourists, but also people migrating to Australia. And that pipeline has essentially been shut down. And I think that's one of the reasons why we did see the home builder grant announced, because the government knew that the developer sector was going to have a tough time without the source of demand coming from overseas buyers. It's also impacted, obviously, on the rental market too. We have seen a significant slump in rental demand. That people say that at a fairly general level. And whilst that's true, it's very much focused on inner city apartment markets. What we have seen over the last 12 months is a big ramp up in rental demand in outer capital city markets and in regional markets. And in fact, in a lot of parts of the country now, rental vacancy rates are at historic lows. So if we move on from what we're seeing there, as I mentioned earlier, we did see borrowing costs move to record low levels. The cash rate was dropped to 0.1%, which was the lowest we've ever seen. But one of the things that was interesting when interest rates were cut was that effectively to get that interest rate cut, you had to lock in your mortgage. And at the same time, the Reserve Bank has repeatedly announced and continue to say that they don't expect interest rates to be increased until at least 2024. And there's a number of things they need to achieve before they increase interest rates. And the first one is they need inflation to be within the Reserve Bank's target range, which is 2 to 3%. At the moment, inflation is about 1.5% and hasn't been in the target range for about 5 years. They've also said that they need to hit their full employment target and start seeing some wage growth. And full employment is thought to be around 4.5% or maybe a little bit lower than that. And to give you some context here, we haven't had an unemployment rate below 5%, apart from 1 month in 2010, I think it was, since before the global financial crisis. So there needs to be a big improvement in the economy until such time as interest rates increase. But we're already starting to see some of the lenders slightly increasing interest rates on 3 and 4 year fixed rate mortgages, perhaps with an eye to the fact that maybe the economic recovery is a bit stronger than expected and interest rates would be going up earlier. In terms of on-site behaviours, there's been some really interesting stuff that we've seen over the last year. So firstly, we have our weekly demand index, which was released pretty much around the time of COVID restrictions coming into place. And what the weekly demand index looks at is people that are more likely to be buying and their level of activity on our site. And what I mean by people that are more likely to be buying, when someone comes onto our website, we look at the behaviours that those people have. And we score all of those behaviours from 0, which means someone's not very interested in the property that they're looking at, to 1, which means they're very interested in a property they're looking at. So the demand index just looks at people that have a score of 0.9 or above. And that indicates that they're very interested in purchasing that property, or have a high, they're more likely to buy that property than just someone generally searching it. And the typical behaviours we'd be looking at here is, they'd be saving that property. They'd be coming back and looking at all those photos every couple of days. They'd save an inspection time. They'd send the property to their friend. They'd be really engaged and showing a high level of interest. And what you can see here is that when the national lockdown hit, there was a big slump in demand. And I think that just really comes back to the fact that there was a lot of uncertainty. We were getting told that 300,000 Australians would get infected with COVID, and no one really knew what was going on, how long we were going to be in lockdown. The interesting thing was that slump in demand only lasted about 3 weeks. And I think people realised that there was a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, and time to start looking at properties again. And you can really see ever since that time, demand has been really strong. And again, coming back to those factors, very low borrowing costs, people not being able to travel overseas. So that has driven a lot of demand for residential property. More recently, you can still see that demand is very high, but it has come down from where it was before Easter. And partly that's seasonal. We did have the Easter holidays and we had Anzac Day, and there were school holidays in there. But I think what we're seeing is that the wave of potential buyers at the moment is not quite as large as that wave we got coming out of lockdowns. So that's going to be something to watch, and that's probably going to lead to slightly slower growth in property prices over the second half of this year and going forward. So that's looking at buyers. If we look at the next chart, which is looking at renters, a very different story. Initially during lockdown, we didn't actually see much of a slump in rental demand, and we know that there was a moratorium on rental evictions which was brought in, but we did see thereafter quite a slump, and I think that was actually driven quite a bit by the fact that people didn't have to move. We didn't have that pipeline of people in Australia from overseas, and I think also some other factors playing in there was we saw a lot of properties from Airbnb becoming listed for longer term rent on our website. After a few months, we did see a bounce back in rental demand, and I think that was okay. Rental prices are readjusting. Let's start looking at what we can possibly move to. Then you can see in January there was a big spike. Now January is always the busiest time of the year for rental demand, but really ever since then you can see that it has drifted lower. But again, a lot of this is driven by inner city unit markets, which are the largest unit markets. If we look into other areas, investors are very active in outer capital cities and regional. Vacancy rates are extremely low, but the rental market is still being impacted by the fact that we have these closed borders and you're not getting these pipeline of people moving to Australia from overseas. So from here, as we return to normal, what are we starting to see? The first one, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is we have seen a fading away of first home buyer demand, which we expect to continue, but lending to investors is back on the march. Now, it's been actually rising for about the last 12 to 15 months, but not rising at the pace of the owner-occupier segment or the first home buyer segment. But there was a big jump in March. Investor lending was up 12.7%. It's still quite a ways off where it was at its peak, but that is a trend we definitely think is going to continue through this year, that investors are going to continue to make a move back into the market. And the reason for that is because interest rates are so low and the likelihood of interest rate hikes or rapid interest rate hikes is very low. What we expect is that people are looking at the residential property market, whereas before, they would have said you need a 5.5% gross rental yield. With interest rates this low, it's probably a 4% or a 4.5% gross rental yield is equivalent to what used to be a 5.5% yield. And if you can get that yield with the potential for some capital growth on top of that, then that starts to make investment very attractive, particularly if there are fewer first home buyers to contend with in the market. We're also seeing the needs of what people want in their houses changing. So we did some surveys recently and we found that 76% of Australians made changes to their home or their life during COVID. So that might have been, they did a renovation, they did something different, or in terms of their life, maybe they looked to move somewhere else. maybe they change jobs. But 50% of Australians would like to have their home to have different features. And if we look at the types of features that people are looking for, it really comes back to the fact, I think, that people are much more focused on family and much more focused on not having to be in the office every single day. So they want more natural light. They want more living spaces. That's probably their kids driving them a little bit crazy during lockdowns and realizing that they maybe need somewhere to escape. Larger outdoor spaces. So they could go into a garden. The kids could play outside without having to drive somewhere. More bedrooms, so more space, and a home office space. And the home office space, I think, and more bedrooms are kind of interrelated, because often a spare bedroom can be an office, but having a dedicated office space becomes more important when people are not traveling into the office every day. I think a lot of people were working from bedrooms, were working from kitchen tables and things like that, and they quickly got pretty sick of that. In terms of the location, we've also had a big rethink in location. And as I showed you right at the start, we have seen prices in regional areas growing at a faster pace than capital city areas. And we've seen demand in regional areas much stronger than in capital city markets. So according to our Property Seeker survey, a third of Australians have said that COVID's made them rethink where they want to live. And younger Australians were much more likely to rethink where they wanted to live as well. And in terms of those people, where are they looking to move? So you can see that the majority of them, more than 50%, are looking to move to regional areas, and 31% are looking to move to outer fringe of metro areas, which is really a change in mindset, because we've always taught you go to the office every day. It's really advantageous to live in the inner city areas. And COVID, at least for now, has changed that mindset of a lot of people. Whereas, okay, if I only have to go into the office 1 or 2 days a week, then what's the benefit for me being in the inner city? Let's go and live by the ocean. Let's go and live in a tree change area. You know, a lot of those areas are cheaper than living in Sydney or Melbourne, and give me that lifestyle benefit. And, you know, I can probably get more house for what I can spend than what I would in an inner city area. And that comes down to those 3 reasons, you know: safer, quieter, it's more affordable, and it's closer to nature and wildlife, which is really the sorts of things people are looking for. Interesting point to make here, though, is these aren't trends that are unique to Australia. These are trends that we're seeing right across the world. So there has been a big move away from some of the larger cities in the US, Europe, Canada, everywhere, New Zealand as well. So it's something that the whole world is experiencing at the moment. And then just finally touching on virtual inspections. So basically overnight, when lockdowns happened, there was little option for real estate agents. They had to move to digital inspections, online options. And there's a strong sense that digital inspections are a value creator tool. And I think one of the things, and this might not be great for agents, but certainly for a consumer, it's a good experience. If you can get a good feel for the home that you're looking through, you can quickly decide whether you want to take that further and go to the open home and investigate it, or you can discount it. Now, I know real estate agents love getting that network of people that are looking to buy, but for someone actually looking to buy, that's really valuable, because you spend most of your weekends going and looking at properties. And if you can have a better list of which ones are actually going to cater to your needs, I think that really helps you. So in terms of our consumers, they think that those listings look more premium. There's more positivity towards the listing agent that use them, and it really helps them nail down which properties they're actually interested in. So, you know, as the point there says, what they are really doing is reducing the friction in the market, and that needs to be top of mind for the people that want to lead the market in the residential property space. So that's it from me now. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to hand you back to Nathan, who's going to introduce you to Sabina.
Thank you, Cam. Now we're going to cut to Sabina. Now, Sabina is a psychologist and social commentator on Channel 7's The Morning Show and Radio 3 AW in Melbourne. And Sabina, a couple of questions for you. We're just picking up on what Cameron said. What are some of the key behavioural changes you believe took place over the past year?
Yes, thanks, Nathan, and a great presentation from Cam, which I think actually speaks to so many psychological insights, which is obviously my area of expertise. The first one is just to acknowledge that it was, you know, we all know a time like no other, which created chaos for many people. But I think humans are innately resilient, and we're also natural problem solvers. So once we took stock, and even Cam's graph, which showed that it was only 3 weeks that people sort of were in, you know, deers in the headlight before their buying and their real estate behaviours started to shift again, shows that we are able to pivot. There's that word that we heard ad nauseum last year, but to move and recalibrate very quickly. And so I think alongside the struggle and the hardship and the challenges, innately in us humans sits creativity and opportunity and new ways of thinking and feeling and being. And that's really what we've seen a lot of humans shifting to. I think as far as our values go, we know, and the research is showing us more and more now, that we do value privacy, we value comfort, belonging and safety. And when we think about these values, I think through the lens of being an agent, you always want to be obviously thinking about not just the acute or literal buying or renting behaviours of the stakeholders that you work with, the clients you work with, but the human behaviours. And if someone's really valuing privacy, comfort, belonging and security, what is it that you can do to honour that? We also know that a lot of us are more cautious now with our finances, with our health, even with our emotions, and also, as I said, with our safety. So some of those behaviours are going to come out in the exchanges that you have with other humans or clients. I call them humans. They're humans, aren't they? Human clients. I think we need to also acknowledge, of course, as Cam said, there's been an increased focus on the home and our well-being, which also means there's a ripple effect on our focus on the community at large, the kinds of communities that we want to belong to. When we felt so disconnected, we're seeking to be really reconnected, both within our home, in our intimate relationships, in our workplace relationships, and in the broader community. We're also focusing on, have a renewed focus on the environment and nature. And a lot of this comes about because we lost choice. We lost the capacity for self-agency during the pandemic. And we want to hold on to the parts of our lives that we can control. And our home is not only where the heart is, our home is one of the domains that we can naturally control. We can choose the aesthetics, we can choose the way we live and work and thrive in our own homes. So I think those are some of the key behaviour changes that we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, Nathan.
And Sabina, you know, how many of these behaviours impact consumers and particularly customers who might be looking to buy, sell and rent?
I think nearly all of them do, and Cam's presentation has spoken to that as well, that particularly with regards to the way we use our home has changed. Research is telling us now that although this differs between organisation to organisation, most people are choosing, if they have the capacity for choice, to return to an office 2 to 3 days a week. So in the organisations that are asking their employees, how many days would you like to return to the office? Would you like to be at work outside the home? Most people are saying 2 to 3 days. So that's quite a permanent shift, and it's quite a paradigm shift in the way that we utilise our homes and think about the workplace. If we're only in the office 2 to 3 days, that leaves a lot of time that we're wanting to recreate and shift the way that we live in the four walls around us. We know that also people are seeking to work with brands that offer empathy, safety, efficiency and flexibility. So as agents, it's a call to action. How do I offer empathy? How do I offer a sense of safety? How best can I offer flexibility? And even the online inspections is speaking to that. And how can I offer this sense of safety? And there are some, really simple tools and strategies to do that from an agent's perspective. One of the sort of my favourites is just thinking about the clients that you work with and looking for the commonality that you share with them. It sounds so simple, but when you feel that you're selling to or when you feel that you're leasing to someone and they have a different story to you, you know, we lose some sense of empathy and connection. When you look for what is it that I have in common with this person who is looking to buy or sell or rent or lease or whatever, a property, you build some sense of empathy, and we're all hungry for that. We're all capable of creating that. So looking for commonality is really important, I think, in the real estate industry, as it is in any industry. And I think my other tip, this is really psychological, it's not real estate specific, but when we're talking to clients, to buyers, to sellers, to renters, never start a sentence with you. This is a simple one, but it's so easy to say, you know, you told me last time that you wanted 5 bedrooms, and something like that very much puts someone on the back foot. So instead of starting any conversation with you, I always recommend to people, whether you're in sales or not, to start with I heard you saying you're looking to expand the number of bedrooms. Or I heard you saying, I heard that you needed two office spaces for you and your partner. Just a simple sort of nuanced shift in the way that we speak can make a big difference to the way we cultivate and build a sense of connection and rapport with people.
Sabina, people have been, you know, in the last 12 months, they've been locked up in their homes. They spent more time at home than they've ever had to do. You know, do people start to feel differently about their home when they've been there for so long?
Absolutely. I think as I started to say, Nathan, that we're looking to cultivate this sense of control. And when the world feels like it's, you know, unraveling around us, every single choice that we make in the home can feel like a real win, can build this sense of safety and security and a sense of agency. And from a, you know, more realistic perspective, I think I was saying to you off air during the week, Nathan, from a relationship perspective, not many of us expected to share the property that we live in with a partner and sometimes children or four-leggeds as well, 7 days a week. And when that shift happened, and is continuing to happen, although kids have gone back to school, but is continuing to happen for many of us in different ways, our sense of privacy, our sense of autonomy has been lost, or it's been shifted. And again, one of the basic human drivers for all of us is to have a sense that we are behind the steering wheel in our own life. We want this idea that we're autonomous. We control where we're driving. We control how we get there. And in the home, that's been challenged when there's other people that we're sharing the space with. So I think one of the major changes we're seeing there is still creating this sense of togetherness, because we value that more than ever, but we're also valuing this sense of separateness as well. And humans are contradictory like that. We want safety and we want risk. We want autonomy and we want togetherness. We move along these continuums. And I think as an agent, or as a, you know, whether you're in, as I say, selling or buying or principal, to be aware of humans' contradictions around these different behaviours is to acknowledge the full breadth of human behaviour.
And Sabina, it's clearly obvious that people's behaviours are changing, but as things hopefully get back to normal, do you think that the behaviours will go back to what they were, or are they here to stay?
Yeah, well, I'm actually quite... I'm not convinced about the term return to normal. It's something that we hear bandied around a lot. And I think we use that phrase because we're seeking to hold on to some sense of security and some sense of knowing and some sense of certainty. Some of my favourite research because of course we don't have a lot of longitudinal research about how a pandemic impacts the whole big wide world. We haven't been around long enough to see the longer term effects. So we look to other pieces of research to give us insights to human behaviour. And my 3 favourite ones, who knew that these 3 had something in common? What do you reckon an astronaut, an Antarctica explorer, and a fly-in, fly-out worker have in common? It's beginning to sound like a bad joke, but it's not. And the answer is that all 3 of these groups of people have been removed from their norm for long periods of time and have started to create a new way of being. So as a fly-in, fly-out worker, obviously you're away from your community, your people, your home, your routine, as an Antarctica explorer. Likewise, you might be by yourself or with one or two people, but your whole environment has shifted. And of course, astronauts are no different. They've gone off into outer space for a period of time. And the research from the different research from these three different groups shows that for some of them, when they returned to their original place of living, didn't want to stay. They wanted to go back to what they had experienced. And I think this is quite insightful or informative in what's happened after this or during this pandemic, that we are going to see some people who are much like the explorers, the astronauts and the fly in, fly out workers, who don't want to return to where they've come from, who want to create some hybrid version of where they've been, and they're wanting to shift their behaviours. So I think even as we're talking to our clients and talking about this new normal, to be aware that people's not only moods have changed, but our needs have changed, and we've tasted something different. We've seen that we can live differently, and some of that's impacted us negatively, but for a lot of people, it's created a recalibration and an invitation to do things differently. And I think the home is actually the one domain in our life that we have the greatest sense of agency over, and that we will continue to hold in high regard and put our emotions, our finances, our time and our energy invested in the home.
You know, what about the compounding effect of uncertainty? You know, people can't, and they don't know when they can go overseas and see their loved ones. They don't know when they're going to book a holiday to Fiji. They don't know if they can book a holiday interstate without things being turned upside down on them, you know, within a day's notice. What is that compounding effect of taking that certainty away from people? What does it what kind of effect does it have on people?
So really what that means for us is that we look to where we can control things in our lives, and we find new ways of doing that. We know we've become far more digitally savvy, which again, Cam talked about. And there's grief. I think one of the things we need to acknowledge is that grief, we're all grieving. And some people might find that word a strong word to use. They might only associate the word grief with death. For me, grief is a sense of loss, and grief is the definition I would use is the difference between where we are now and where we thought we would be. And the space between where we are now and where we thought we would be is pretty big for most of us. And it's this space between that I would define as grief. So acknowledging that we're all grieving in some way. And when we grieve, we have to feel it. There's no shortcut. There's no fast track through grief. There's no way to say, not me, I'm not touched by this experience. And so I think to acknowledge the loss that we've all experienced, but that doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom. I mean, humans have tolerated and lived with grief since the dawn of time. So we find new ways to connect, new ways to move forward, and new ways to process those losses. And I think probably for me, one of the key words is tolerating. It doesn't mean we're rejoicing in the fact that we can't go to Fiji, or that we're rejoicing in the fact that we can't see overseas, family overseas, or have overseas experiences. But we do find ways to accept that when we feel that we have got a sense of control over other parts of our lives. And as I said, that may well be the home, but it can be other parts of our lives as well. Relationships, learning, growth, mastery, purpose, meaning. We're looking to cultivate all these areas in our life.
What about when you start to take away, you know, humans' ability to choose? If they can't do things, what tends to play out? Do those sort of choices start to find their other ways into other industries? We see some industries that are doing really, really well, while others are actually going backwards. You know, is that a byproduct of taking people's ability to choose away from them?
Yeah, I mean, some industries are thriving because they are tapping into the choices that people are able to make at this time. So I think we all know, we all relate personally to this idea that when choice is taken away in one part of our life, it doesn't feel good. So we search very quickly to find the areas that we can you know, create choice and have some agency with. So I think we are seeing sort of a reshift. But I really see this as quite, without being evangelical, it's a time of, as I said, recalibrating and being creative. I think as agents, use your creativity. Creativity is not the domain of artists and musicians and actors and writers. Creativity is the domain of every human who's looking for new ways to move forward in a world that's shifted.
Cameron, I might bring you in for a question now. I've heard this, and I think it was just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, that the new working week in the city in high density areas is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And what impact, Cam, does that have on the CBDs, the major capital cities across the country, as the population is just not there? The cafes, the commercial space. What impact does that have long term? And I guess the second part of that question, will it recover?
Well, it has a big impact, Nathan, because a lot of CBDs rely on people being in there and doing things after work or before work. So, and I think Friday was always a classic day of that. Back in the old days, people used to knock off work at 1 or 2 in the afternoon and go to the pub and probably hang out there until late in the evening. One of the reasons why a lot of CBDs are struggling at the moment is because people don't have a good reason to go back there. A lot of the restaurants and cafes aren't open, or if they are open, they're only open on certain days. And that kind of has a bit of a snowball effect, because the longer people stay away, the harder it will be for these businesses to survive, and there'll be fewer of them. And that will then in turn make the CBD even less desirable. So fewer people will want to come in. So, I can understand why, obviously the big CBD building owners are very keen to encourage people back into the CBD, while a lot of government departments, like the city and the local and state governments, are trying to get people back into the office full time. But I also understand that there's a resistance of that, because a lot of times before COVID, the people that were given flexibility to work from home were more senior people in businesses. And we look at it now that everyone in a business has proved that they can work successfully at home. And if you don't have to commute for a couple of hours each way each day, you don't have to go and not that everyone does this, but a lot of people eat out. So you're not spending, $15, $20 a day on food when you're in the office. I think that this is actually a change that we're going to see permanently. Initially, I think a lot of people expected that they were just going to work from home forever and not have to go into the office. And I don't think that's realistic, because I think you lose that collaboration. Whilst we do it pretty successfully over Zoom, it's not quite the same as actually bumping into someone in the hallways. But you don't need to be doing that every single day of the week. I mean, I know me personally, I go into the office 1 or 2 days a week. And there's certain days when I know I've got a lot of work and I just need to focus on that I would never consider going into the office. And I think that's really the change that we're seeing coming out of COVID.
I've got 2 more questions. I've got one for you, Cam, and then a final one for Sabina. Cameron, property prices are growing at the fastest rate in 31 years. As an economist, as someone who studies data, who studies real estate trends, how concerning is that? And what's on the other side of this sort of growth?
It's concerning in the context that it's a very rapid rate of growth. But if you look at it in the broader context, there hasn't actually been a lot of price growth in most markets over the last 2 or 3 years. People kind of have a bit of a short memory and forget that prices, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, but also in other parts of the country, had been falling since about late 2017 because of the macro-prudential policies that were brought in. So if you look over the longer term, prices haven't increased that much, but the concern is whether or not prices continue to increase at this really fast pace. And as I said in my presentation, I don't think that's going to happen, because I think that first wave of buyers was really strong and there was a lack of supply, and that was driving up prices. We're starting to see more properties coming onto the market, and the next wave of buyers is not quite as large as that first wave of buyers that we saw. But certainly, if it were to continue to grow at the fastest pace in 31 years, then that would be concerning. But we've also seen in the past that the banking regulator, APRA, can intervene and can change macro-prudential policies and make it a bit more difficult for people to access loans. Not that that's anything that people in the real estate industry will want to hear, but were they to do that, they could effectively slow down the market. So there's definitely proven ways to stop that price growth. But I don't think they would be too concerned with that price growth at the moment. But if it continued for, say, 6 or 9 months, that's when they would start to get a little bit concerned.
And a final question for you. I've heard a few people say this to me, that COVID was a university degree in life. ever knew we had to do. What's your interpretation of that? And what do you think people mean by that university degree in life?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting philosophical note to finish it on, but we've had so much hard data in the webinar. I think it's a really interesting question. A university degree, I think, you know, what that's really speaking to is it's a lesson. It's an important lesson and a shift in the way, a paradigm shift in the way we think, feel and behave. And I think that resonates for me personally. I think that I've seen so many people, particularly early on in lockdown, amongst the sort of chaos and the surprise and the hardship, you know, we heard time and time again. I did a lot of media interviews. I did a lot of talkback radio. I saw a lot of clients. I did a lot of seminars and webinars worldwide. And the sentiments were the same. The sentiments that a lot of people shared were actually, now that we've been forced to slow down and we've been forced to shift the way we're behaving, there's a lot of things here that we want to take away. We want to live slower lives. We want to live with more meaningful connections. We don't want to run from pillar to post. We want to smell the roses when the roses are in front of us. We want to connect with each other and nature. And these are lessons. They're not just lessons, they're takeaways that I think most of us relate to. And if it takes a world pandemic, well, that's kind of it's a big whack on the head if that's what it takes. I will say, just to close this conversation, that we are slow learners. And one of the examples I have of that is that we all go to funerals, sometimes weddings as well. And after a funeral, you'll hear people saying, I'm going to hug my children a bit tighter, and I'm not going to be so mean to my partner, and I'm going to, you know, do what really matters. I'm going to maybe work less hours. We have these sort of insights and these epiphanies after we're confronted by something that's shifted us. But then days or weeks or months later, we tend to revert back to our old habits, and old habits die hard. And so I think the call to action here for all of us, after the experience we've all been through, is to take the bits that serve us well and leave the bits that have been, you know, that have been challenging for all of us. There is many great learnings here, and I think it's beholden on each of us to grab the good bits and run with them.
I love your insights, Sabina. Thank you. And thank you to Cam and to everyone online. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. We'd love to get your feedback. So please, we're going to have a little poll pop up on your screen now. So take a second opportunity to fill that poll in. I hope you enjoyed the session, and certainly appreciate everyone for tuning and listening, and look forward to sharing more insights on our Agent Marketing Centre as we go forward. And for everyone, thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.